everyone, welcome back to the channel. We're Performance Agile. I'm Eric.
And I'm Vince.
And today we're talking planning.
So today's quote is from Benjamin Franklin. And he was quoted as saying, "Failure to plan is planning to fail." So we're going to talk about planning today. There's this huge misconception regarding planning and Agile. So we're going to talk a little bit about, all of the various different ways that we do plan, and we do plan in Agile. So let's start off with first talking about one of the significant differences is in the old way of non-Agile, waterfall, traditional project managed planning would go. So what would you like to say about that?
The big difference between the two is everything has to be done up front in a waterfall style plan. It is a single pass through all requirements, and if you miss any requirements or requirements change, you're really out of luck. Mm-hmm. And that's unfortunate because we know that requirements change and plans change and business direction changes all the time. And
even
in some
more
cases,
now than before,
literally every day. We are in unprecedented times in our current society, and businesses have had to shift and adapt and change directions to stay viable and relevant. And if they didn't have the ability or flexibility to adapt on the fly and change their requirements and planning, well, they'd be out of business.
Right. I mean, it's a very dynamic environment, right, that businesses are living in, surviving in. And so you need to be able to have that flexibility and the process in place to successfully navigate through all of this change, right? So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it, the misconception, the myth that because you're Agile, you don't need requirements, you don't need to plan.
Right.
You just go out and you wing it, and that's not the case. As a Scrum Master, over the course of the last few years, I've done many sprint planning sessions, and that is a short 2-week planning cycle that we engage the team on to say, hey, what do we think that we can define, build, test, and potentially ship, right? And that is a planning phase, and it just happens very, very frequently every 2 weeks. I know that there's some teams that plan daily. If you're in a Kanban flow, you do just so small micro plans that you might not even think of it as a planning day. But you plan when you wake up. What am I going to do today? Like, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to do XYZ things. And then you go take that up to the team, and you do team planning and organization planning and increment planning.
So when he's more or less talking about the daily stand-up, right, and on the daily planning. And it's really not daily planning, though it can be construed that way. Let's revisit that the daily stand-up is a means of communication, right? It's a technique that we use for the teams to talk to each other as they're going through their day or even getting started on their day. But yes, I mean, it is a way of reaffirming with your colleagues on the team, hey, this is what I'm doing today. So it is a form.
It's like a small micro goal.
It's a way of looking at it. So the next level up from the daily discussion is, if you're doing Scrum or if you're doing XP, would be your iteration or sprint planning, right? So from there, we're looking even bigger picture now, right? So we're focused on our daily events. Now we're looking at our iteration, if that's what we're doing. Now we're looking at what a lot of people like to do is quarterly planning, or they call it 30, 60, 90-day planning, or they call it program increment planning. Pretty much the same thing. You can throw whatever label you want on it, but it's usually a 3-month snapshot of what we want to hopefully accomplish. Right? It's more of a roadmap, in my opinion, than some people look at it as a release plan. I'm a little anti-release plan with regard to PI planning. I look at it more as a of a roadmap. Your first month absolutely should be very clear. The second month, a little squishy. That third month, very squishy, right? So lots going to happen in that second and third month. And as you approach, you'll adjust as you go.
And that addresses a lot of the concerns of the legacy business from the financiers controlling the purse strings of that waterfall style mindset of, we really need you to have good, strong, firm requirements, a strong plan in place. We need to know the runway.
Mm-hmm.
We need that 1 year view, that 10-year view, whatever the case is. Then they came to the compromise of, we can give you a year's view, but then we're going to chop it up into the 4 quarters and plan at a quarterly level, and we will adjust and have that finance discussion about how we allocate our money, our employees, our technical resources. And I think that that's settled really well with a lot of organizations and enterprises to have that line, that balance that they can walk.
Yeah, so that next level up, as you revealed, is that, depending on whether it's your department or the organization at large that you're in, they are going to try to determine for that year, what are we going to do? What are we going to spend our money on? Where's our focus? The corporate priorities. And so you do get that long range, that 1 year vision. And then as you go through this process, you're breaking it down, all the way down until you get something of value out in production, right? So there's a lot of planning. Unlike, I might add, go back to the traditional project managed based planning, especially if you are living in software or just, technology in general, but largely in software. It really came to light that this approach was unsuccessful in software because, as all project managers know, project management is defined by a start date
and an end date.
And we all know that if you live and work in software, there is no end date.
Well, it's by definition of a project. It is a unique deliverable that has a start and an end date. But when you're talking a life cycle management, that product exists as long as you need it to.
As long as it's right.
That end date is ephemeral. It doesn't really exist until
it doesn't really exist, right, until you sunset it.
That's right.
So that is a huge and significant difference, right? Because when you're doing planning from a project perspective, you are trying to define for whatever time period that is, whether it's 6 months or it's 4 years, all of the things that you're going to do in that time period. And so, we all know that that's been very unsuccessful.
And not saying any of those older style project management tactics don't come in handy in Agile planning. There still might be some sequencing of events, some critical path that is necessary to put down the underlying infrastructure that all the software is developed on top of. And you still might need some of that. But the difference is instead of coming to the table and doing all of your requirements and planning in one shot, it's continuous.
Right.
We'd argue that there is much more planning and more requirements documentation in Agile than there ever was in.
Well, it's much more flexible for sure, right?
But the difference is that because you're not getting a 80-page, 100-page, 200-page requirements document,
master requirements list
out of the gate,
right?
You're developing it over time. You're really breaking it down into more consumable pieces. You might just see it differently in your mind. You're not getting that 80, 100-page thing up front, and you might be thinking, oh my God, we don't plan, we don't do requirements. Well, you do. You just get it over time. It's an elaborate requirement. Like you think about a Subway sandwich. You don't go into Subway and say, right away, this is what I want with everything on it, like all my toppings on it. You tell whoever's making your sandwich behind the stand, you want the sub, but then I want all of these things on it, and you elaborate over time.
And so that's a good analogy. I'm going to stick with that. And so from an Agile approach, we talk about just-in-time requirements, right? So when we're planning, and if you are doing iterations, and we're talking about that, your first month. So if you're doing, 2-week sprints, So in your first month of your quarterly planning, you should pretty much have a good idea of what's going to be, especially in that very next sprint, but even one sprint out. Just in time requirements or just in time planning even means, so if we're ordering a sandwich and I get to the counter and I'm telling the person, this is the kind of sandwich that I want, this is what I want on it, blah blah blah, the kind of bread, and then I'm watching them making it and I go, nah, wait a second, I kind of changed my mind. I'd rather not have that, I'd rather have this instead. And they will say, they might look at you, but they will say, okay, right? Because you're the customer and you're paying for it. And you will, expect to get what you want. Why is anything that we're doing organizationally any different, right? With the products and the services that we're providing. So if our customer says, I asked for this, I thought I wanted this, but guess what? Something has changed and we need to adjust and we want this instead. So the response should be, okay, and we'll adjust, right? And so that's why this approach to planning is so much better. It is so much more valuable to the customer than traditionally based planning.
And on that, if the customer does decide to change their mind, that does not give them carte blanche on getting all of those changes in the same timeline as originally requested. If you are developing something over time and you're elaborating over time, and then the customer says, we're changing directions, here's what I need now, I still need it in 3 months, it's probably likely that that's not going to happen, depending on how significant the change.
Right. So, and it also depends on the business that you're in.
Yeah, especially for government or somebody who's more controlled.
Right.
That has restrictions on money or security.
Even some kind of healthcare, like if there's a new policy
or finance.
or a new drug that came out or something, and guess what? We need to make this available. We need to adjust here.
Yeah. And in finance too, like when they have to do like their SEC controls or the Sarbanes-Oxley requirements and all that, and HIPAA and PII and all that fun jazz. They got to get that certified and signed off.
There's always exceptions. So we're not suggesting that, there always are.
There are.
Right.
And on the topic of having a conversation with requirements and planning and telling the customer that they're going to get what they want, there's a YouTube video that we came across not too terribly long ago. It's labeled The Expert. And in this video, they bring in an expert who is the best red line drawer that exists in the industry.
Yeah, the video's it's worth a laugh because it's
We'll link it up here. In one of the corners. The link will be
or
up
down below or wherever we can put it. Yeah, but
and the customer says we want 7 red lines, but some of them need to be blue, green, and transparent, and they all have to be perpendicular to each other, strictly perpendicular to each other. Like none of them can be parallel. And so the expert, he's sitting there.
Yeah.
What?
But I'm an expert in red lines.
Yeah.
Right.
And then they have a project manager who's just like, yeah, none of this is a problem. We'll deliver it for you. And the expert's sitting there. He's trying to have a conversation with the customer to try to really understand that they don't need red lines. They need some red lines, blue lines, green lines, and some with transparent lines. And he's really sitting there trying to hammer in on what do they actually want, what is the requirements, what is the plan, what are the things that they need. And I feel like that is a good anecdote for a lot of conversations we have.
It is, and
today.
Unfortunately, that poor guy. I don't want to be a spoiler, but he just finally gives in to the pressure of the people in his organization, and he finally just says, "Yeah, sure, okay,
I'll deliver it for you."
After he just spent a good 20 minutes trying to tell them why they can't get that right, but it's funny. Anyway, we digress.
Yeah, so this is not a situation that's unique to us or to the expert in the video. You have to have good, strong communication skills with your customer to elaborate requirements over time, just in time, plan. just enough ahead to where you have the flexibility to change and adapt and be viable if environmental changes, business needs changes, whatever the case is. But planning is important. As Benjamin Franklin said, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And it is. You can't just go out there and wing it.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to fall flat on your face. You're going to have people duplicating efforts, working past each other. They're going to run off into their silos and they're going to do their own thing. And we've seen that before where somebody will work years on software and they come out to release and it can't stand up. It's not a viable product.
Yeah.
And they go out of business or.
And so I'd like to address this concept of the roadmap just real quick. And this is just my opinion on it. You may hear other opinions. So similar to getting into your car and you're embarking on a trip from your point of origin to somewhere. You have a vision. I want to be somewhere doing something by some time. And so I'm going to plan out and I'm going to map out how I'm going to get from here to there, right? So if we're driving, it's a roadmap. If we're in business and we're trying to decide, well, I know I want this and I want it this year. I kind of have an idea of when I'd really like to have it, but how am I going to do that? How are we as a group, as a team, as an organization, how are we going to do that? So let's kind of see what that looks like if we kind of lay it out, if you will, without putting any dates on it at first. So let's just kind of look at that. And then let's kind of assess, really what is it going to take for us to go from here to there realistically. And so that is your roadmap, in my opinion. And then you might start to get some, rough estimates in terms of time as to, like how we might get little pieces along the way. You're going to have to stop for gas, stop for food, for other things, right? So no different as you're building a product or service. You've got points along the way where you're going to want to stop and deliver or assess, get some feedback, things like that. Can those change? Do you ever have to detour? Do you ever have to stop longer than you thought that you were going to for whatever reasons, maintenance or weather or whatever? Sometimes you have to turn around and go in a different direction completely.
Excuse me.
and so that's why I really enjoy talking about roadmaps because typically, when you lay out your Gantt chart or your schedule and you start putting in milestones, right? And if you don't hit those dates with the things that you said, well, I think we should have this by this time, or we should have this by this time. And then people start getting, beat up because you're not hitting those milestones exactly the day that you thought that they were going to happen. You need to be a little bit flexible here, folks, with regard to your planning and your projections and your estimations. Up close to where you are in time should be pretty clear. Again, it's just like your quarterly planning. But the further out you go, anything can happen. So just be a little flexible on that. And that does it for another video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave us a comment. Give us a like, hit subscribe, and we will see you on the next video.